that's on.
So that, ignore that second light.
Got Good morning. Welcome to the bright and early budget hearings. The beginning of this, that sound you just heard was the pistol shot for the marathon that we're beginning here today. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Committee to order for February 8th, 2023. And Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Representatives Barrett, Boyd, Campbell, Camper, Cochran, Crawford, Faison, Freeman, Gant, Garrett, Hawk, Hicks, Kiesling, Lamberth, Love, Lynn, McKenzie, Miller, Moon, Parkinson, Shaw, Sparks, Whitson, Williams, Zachary, Vice Chairman Baum, Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Before we get underway, are there any personal orders or announcements this morning? Seeing none, but I would recognize Chairman Zachary and the fact that he drove a long way to be here with us this morning after watching his son play his last high school basketball game last night. So we appreciate your diligence in joining us on time. Certainly, Chairman Zachary, your name was called.
My wife and I were talking last night, so I basically drove to the beach, but I ended up at the same destination. And so it was quite a bit of driving yesterday. But I didn't want to miss our Attorney General. I mean, I knew I had to be here for him. So thank you, Madam Chair.
And we're a lot more fun than the beach. Any other personal orders? Chairman Moon.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. I hope members have sunglasses with them this morning. One of our astute members will be coming in this morning, and I don't think you will miss his arrival. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Well, with that teaser, seeing no further personal orders or announcements, we have 5 budget hearings scheduled this morning, and so we're going to jump right in. We are on a fairly tight schedule, and again, as I announced on the floor, our hope is to be completed with our budget hearings by the March 8th, but that will require some long days and a lot of hearings and a lot of focus and attention from the committee members. So with that, we are out of session, and our first presenter, if you would, our relatively new Attorney General. Congratulations, in case we haven't had a chance to say that officially. And you would just introduce yourself and your team, and we members, for those presentations that do have slides, that you can find them on your dashboard. So that everything should be loaded and ready to go. So, General.
Meddy. I'm the Tennessee Attorney General as of September 1st. This is my first budget hearing, and we will do our best to be expeditious and responsive. I'd like to introduce my team. To the far right here, I have Lacey Mace, who's my Chief Deputy Attorney General. She supervises about 160 of our attorneys engaged in trial litigation and advice to various clients, including sometimes to the General Assembly. I have Kelly Smith. She's our Chief Operating Officer, who oversees all the operations side of the office. And I'd also like to introduce Brandon Smith, my Chief of Staff, who is sitting back there. Pete Napadalung, who is our financial guru, and Matt Cook, who is one of our legislative liaisons. So it's my pleasure to be here. We have a short presentation, but I will try to be speedy to allow time for questions. The basics of our request are, first, the statutory salary increase. This is required by law. It's non-discretionary from our end. Second, we're asking for a salary market adjustment. We were part of the Ernst & Young study, and this is particularly important to our office this year. We had 25% turnover in our attorneys last year. That is by far the highest turnover we've had in known history, going back about 15 years. It's important for us as an office to be able to retain and recruit quality counsel. And a lot of times people will work at the AG's office for a while and then they'll roll out into private practice. But it is critical for us to have them for long enough that the institutional knowledge that they amass over the course of their practice can be passed on to the next generation. And we've seen a lot of folks in the middle start leaving. I'm going to cover that a little bit more later, but this is a very high priority for the office. And since the interview with the Supreme Court, I've been saying keeping and hiring the best people is the top priority. Personnel is policy. And then finally, we have a request that the governor's office graciously supported for the creation of a new strategic litigation unit. And I'm going to be talking about that a little more in a moment as well. But this is a specialized unit to handle some particularly sensitive cases. Next slide, please. We also have the base payroll reduction of $350,900. And going back to the salary market adjustment request, which is the biggest part of the change in the request, we did the salary study. We had the significant turnover. And one thing we noticed that were a lot of our departures were not to the private sector. We had some going there, and there's a very hot legal market in Nashville. So there, firms, companies are aggressively recruiting good lawyers, and they are paying very, very well for that. Now, we're able to recruit people in part because we give them a different value proposition. They don't have to bill hours. They get to work on meaningful and important cases. They get to do the right thing. But there are other public sector entities that we're hiring too, and we were losing people to them for salary reasons. Metro scooped up some of our really bright young prospects who were developing well in our office and took them off with better pay. Similarly, there are agencies that were taking our lawyers with better pay. We want to be able to stay competitive. We want to be able to recruit and retain the best people, because at the end of the day, everything you do here, all the statutes you pass, are only as good as our ability to defend them in court. And if you do something and we don't have the lawyers we need to fight the fight, that's a problem. Another thing I want to highlight is the revenue brought in by our office. Last year, our budget was approximately $60 million. We brought in over $300 million to the state. So there's a significant multiplier there. If we have good lawyers who are in a position to do the good work, we're able to both provide great legal advice, great representation in defense of state statutes. It also saves the state money because we're better able to defend cases that could cost the state more money. And we've got people in consumer protection, Medicaid fraud, collections, bankruptcy, who are able to bring money back into the state. So we think it's very important to ensure that we maintain the population of quality lawyers and be able to recruit as people leave the office. Separately, we've got the request for the strategic litigation unit. This would be a specialized litigation team within the office, and there are two reasons to do this. This is a team that would focus on lawsuits against the federal government, protecting the constitutional rights of Tennesseans. It would defend certain federalism-oriented laws, such as the abortion law, such as transgender laws, where there's a federalism component and there is a unifying legal theme separate from the ordinary subject matter underlying different types of cases that sometimes involve the same issues. And then third, it would look at ESG issues with companies that are engaged in collusion at the expense of consumers in pursuit of social ends. So we're asking for 10 new positions for this. The two reasons for it are, first, there's a need for it. I have heard from many of you there is a strong appetite for my office to be more active in pushing back against the federal government. As a matter of separation of powers, it is essential that the states protect their sovereignty. There are things that the federal government can and should do. There are things that the federal government can and should not do. When the federal government overreaches at the expense of the states have to push back. But separately, all our other lawyers are very busy doing the stuff that they do day to day. We don't want to start doing more of this work at the expense of defending the state in employment cases, or of defending the state in environmental cases, or of enforcing our environmental statutes, or of doing all the other many things the office does. So creating a new unit would allow us to do this additional task well without sacrificing any of the existing responsibilities of the office. We are a busy office. We're working on many cases. We have about 13,000 cases going right now, over about 180 lawyers total. That includes work in opioids. We're bringing in tremendous amounts of money to the state going into the Opioids Abatement Fund. Tennessee is one of the 2 lead states in a 50-state coalition looking at social media platforms and their effect on the mental health of young people. We're involved in multiple antitrust suits against Google and Meta. We're investigating Ticketmaster, so consumer protection is a very busy area for us. We're pushing back on federal overreach, including both leading a number of suits. We're leading the Title IX suit against the Department of Education. We've secured an injunction against the Department of Education, the EEOC, Department of Agriculture on some regulatory action. We're engaged in comments, and we're coordinating with other attorney general offices and participating in a wide variety of suits as part of a broader coalition pushing back against federal overreach. And then we're defending state laws. We do that all the time. Constitutional issues arise in some of the big high-profile front page of the paper cases, but there are loads of other cases where various state laws are challenged or where the state is sued for everything from pothole damage to multi-million-dollar contract violations. We cover it all. We also provide legal advice to the General Assembly and all the rest of the state government. So we're a busy bunch of people over there. With that, I will be very happy to take your questions and look forward to giving you the information that you need.
Thank you, General Scamatti. And I think as probably a lot of committee members, and I'm certain that a lot of folks who might be watching this at home really don't have a good idea of the depth and breadth of the work that is done in the AG's office and the many ways that you both protect state rights, protects taxpayers, and all of the other things that you're involved in. So we do thank you and your 180-person strong group for the work that you do in that regard. I have several questions, and we will begin with Representative Gant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, General. Going back to FY 22-23 budget, employers nationwide have experienced large increases in the number of resignations and retirements since the pandemic. Does your agency expect to experience an increase in resignations or retirements in the coming years? And is this increase in state funding enough to make your agency competitive with other state departments?
We're still looking at what the other departments are doing and trying to calibrate that. We haven't had a chance to fully digest the budget since the adjustments were made. Our request was made based on our best guess given the information that we had. We do expect continuing retirements. You know, our model is typically we get in a good number of newer attorneys. We try to keep them through the middle of their career. And then we have a few lifers who stick around and, you know, really are the absolute backbone of the office. A lot of those folks are retiring. I don't know that we're going to see an uptick, but because the middle is getting hollowed out, it's becoming more and more of a problem when when any given attorney retires and takes their institutional knowledge with them. You know, we will continue to look at these numbers and make sure that we're in the right place. But as I said, our highest priority is ensuring that we can retain the people we need to retain.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Chairman Moon.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and welcome aboard, General. The Attorney General Office receives federal funding for Project Guardian, which is utilized to reduce violent crimes, especially gun crimes. How long has your agency been receiving these funds? How are the funds being utilized? And is it making a difference in reducing violent crimes?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. So when Don Cochran was the U.S. Attorney, he reached out. There was this federal program, Project Guardian, that would allow state employees to be funded through the Department of Justice and detailed to the U.S. Attorney's offices for the purpose of prosecuting gun crimes. We signed on to Project Guardian to provide that assistance. We are no longer participating in the program. The federal government's, there were some bureaucratic problems that became just overwhelming for us to deal with, given that it was for one position. And so we ended up not continuing to participate in that program. It had funded one prosecutor. And I don't recall exactly how much we received last year, but that was the terminal year of the agreement.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, Chairman Moon. And I meant to say this in personal orders and announcements and totally forgot, but we welcome Leader Lambert. He is the poster child for We Need Choice Lanes in Tennessee. He did call and tell me he was stuck on the interstate behind a very large traffic jam. So welcome, Leader Lambert, and we'll assume that you have a positive vote on the transportation bill. Chairman Whitson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and good morning, General Committee. Normally, I don't question my constituents, but I'm just following orders, okay? So, you mentioned briefly in your opening comments about some major settlements from your department, and could you kind of tell us how these settlements will benefit Tennesseans, and especially the opioids and the vaping, and let the committee know what you see the benefits that they will provide us.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, you said the opioids and what?
And the vaping.
Oh, the vaping settlement. Yes, sir, the Juul settlement. So with respect to opioids, this has been something Tennessee's been on the lead on for years. Our Consumer Protection Division is phenomenal. We were one of the lead states nationally going after the opioids companies, starting with Purdue Pharmaceuticals, which is the root of all evil as far as opioids are concerned. And going after additional distributors, manufacturers, even down to retailers. Nationally, the number of the settlement value at this point is something north of $50 billion. Some of those settlements are stretched over, 20 years. And Tennessee is getting its share of that. We've already received into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And thanks to the General Assembly, we were able to establish the Opioid Abatement Trust Fund and the Opioid Abatement Council. So the council is made up of appointees from the speakers and the governor who are experts in various aspects of the impact of opioids, and they're deciding where to send this money. The overwhelming majority of money that goes into or that comes in via the opioid settlements goes to the trust fund. It's going to be funded for many years to come. And all that money is going to go toward abating opioids in a variety of ways. The council has the authority to do everything from educational programs, healthcare programs, law enforcement programs. And because it's a group of experts, they get to decide where they're going to get the most bang for their buck. And it's spread all across the state. It's not going to be going to just one or two or three areas. There's a mechanism in place to ensure that because the epidemic affects every part of the state's going to get funded. With respect to the Juul settlement, the vaping settlement, that money went into the AG reserves, which is used largely for consumer protection enforcement. And so we fund a variety of our consumer protection litigation cases in part through those reserves. And we want to ensure that we have sufficient funds there to cover both the salaries that are covered through reserves and especially litigation costs, which have gotten substantial. And we want to be cautious that we never get into the red on that. And sometimes those costs can run up very quickly and very unexpectedly.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Madam Chairman.
Chairman Hawk, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and General Committee. Again, echo the congratulations for the position, and thanks for the work you're doing. I want to go back to slide number 4 and talking about your staff, the attorney turnover, 25%. That's painful. I know it's painful. Let me think outside the box a little bit. What does your shop look like? Do all 180 attorneys have to come downtown on 2 blocks or two doors away from us to the office, or could we find an attorney in Knoxville or Jackson or someone to be part of the shop and not have to physically come into the office? What would that look like, General?
So I love that question. We have 4 remote offices right now. One of them is in Memphis, and that's a full service office. We have another 3, Jackson, Chattanooga, and Knoxville, which are paid for by TDOT and have attorneys who do TDOT work there. We have ID revenue funding both those offices and the people working there. In the long term, I am very interested in expanding the footprint of the office. I think it will help tremendously with recruiting. I think I know for sure there are a lot of great lawyers in Memphis who may be interested in working for the state. I'm pretty sure in East Tennessee, it's the same way. So we're working on building up the Memphis office and making sure that we're doing it right. Because our office is organized along the lines of divisions, it's a little tricky to just have one person off doing their own thing. But we saw during the pandemic that it's increasingly possible for people to collaborate and work together without being physically together. I think it's important to have some physical collaboration too. We have a remote work program, but we still want people in the office 3 days a week. But, that's an area that I'm constantly looking at, and we're going to work to develop the Memphis office and use that as a blueprint for expanding into other offices. That said, I think it's going to take a little bit of time to make sure we're doing it right. We don't want to overreach there. And so the retention issue is, I think, pressing in a way that can't fully be remedied by expanding the office.
Chairman Hawk, have follow-up?
Thank you very much. And I understand through the grapevine, and correct me if this is, well, not news you want to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. Are you bringing a young attorney by the name of Slattery back into the office? Have I heard that?
We are. He's going to be outside counsel helping with some of our work. And he has a tremendous amount of institutional knowledge. And there are certain types of law where he is hands down the best lawyer in Tennessee, period, amen. And we're very grateful that he's willing to keep helping the office out. He left me in a very good position coming in as Attorney General, and the office was in really great shape because of his management. I'm grateful for his continued service.
Well, we're glad to hear that there are opportunities out there for former General Slattery. We were all concerned that he would be on the unemployment rolls. So, Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Chair Lady. General, it's great to see you today, and we appreciate all the work that the Attorney General's office does. And I'm excited to hear about this strategic litigation department that you've got going on there. A few years ago, when I first got in the General Assembly, we moved the Consumer Protection Division over from Commerce and Insurance over to the Attorney General's office. And last year, there was an effort to move the Consumer Advocate Division over to TPUC for setting rates for investor-owned utilities, and we kind of fought that back. And in both of those cases, I think it's because we believe y'all have such a professional cadre of attorneys there and do such a good job. You're efficient, have good oversight. Back in 2020, the Human Rights Commission was sunsetting that year, and we were having some conversations about moving it over under the Attorney General's office. Now, COVID-19 hit, and we were forced to kind of stop those conversations, and we just extended them, I think, for 4 more years. When that does come back up again, would you be receptive, or do you think that's a bad idea to move that division over under the Attorney General's office?
And thank you for that question. I remember those conversations. I think we'd have to look at the details of it. In a lot of states, that enforcement authority is in the Attorney General's office. And when I started, I was at the U.S. Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division there. So at the federal level, civil rights is contained, in the Attorney General's authority as well. I think it's a very detail-oriented question, and there are a lot of considerations to make sure that Tennessee continues to be well served. We are always happy to follow the policy lead of the General Assembly. But I recognize that any new authority that the AG's office takes on has to be done delicately. And, I think we have to look at the existing structures and be careful before making any big changes that we're going to do it in the right way.
Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, and thank you for being here, General. Thank you, you and your staff. I have a question based upon an experience that I just recently had, maybe 2 or 3 months ago. You talked about, it's kind of a follow-up of something you've already talked about, the council that is formed by the Speaker's office in connection with your office. When these young men and women are caught with this opiate and go to trial and are convicted, who is responsible, or do your office say to them, if you want some help, you know, this is what we can do, or are they just simply convicted and go to jail, or is it based upon what their attorney tell them? Could you just talk a little bit about how that process would work in case someone did want help?
Sure. So our role in actually fighting opioids here is really in pushing back against the companies that have brought them into the state and in getting resources to let other parts of the state fight back. Some states, the AG's office does prosecutions. We have very narrow authority to prosecute cases. If a judge or a district attorney needs to be prosecuted, then it comes to the Attorney General's office. Otherwise, it's the elected district attorneys that are out there running the actual prosecution of these cases. We do have a great drug court system in a variety of places throughout Tennessee. And, you know, I go to church with a guy who benefited from the drug courts, and they really helped him get his life back on track when he was dealing with addiction issues. In appropriate cases, it sure looks like those are effective. And I know that's one of the things that the council can use the money to fund. But in terms of day-to-day operations or in deciding who gets the benefit of that or anything along those lines, you know, all we really do is get the money and provide it to the folks who make those decisions.
Just a quick follow-up.
Representative Shaw, continue.
In this particular case, I understand the young man wanted help. And of course, again, I don't know what his attorney said to him, but he wanted help, but rather he got, and it was the first time he'd been convicted, but he went to jail instead. And I just wondered if we missed something, or is there some kind of way, some process by which a person can say, you know, this is what I want to do.
Representative Shaw, the district attorneys are going to be up next, and that might be, the Attorney
Okay.
General can correct me if I'm wrong, but that might be a question better directed to them. All right, and we have a couple more people on the list. We are out of time, so I would ask that for brief questions and brief responses so we can continue on with our day. I believe Leader Camper is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just make mine quick. On page 7 of your major cases, on your pushing back on federal overreach, and you can just provide it later. I'd like to know more about some of these, what these unlawful regulations are that you're speaking of.
Yes,
that,
ma'am.
That you are helping to
And
fight.
very briefly, most of the stuff that we're pushing back on involves the redefinition of sex and sex discrimination regulations.
That includes the one on the EEOC as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And Representative Miller, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Thank you, Attorney General and your team. I'm on 7 as well. And you mentioned earlier that you had 13,000 cases. So do you anticipate an increase in those 13,000 or a reduction based on the hiring of 10 additional attorneys?
You know, there may be some very marginal increase. We have a number of cases that are really high volume. The types of cases that the new lawyers will work on are going to be pretty intense. They're going to involve complicated constitutional questions. So they'll probably only be working on a few cases a piece at a time. Some of our lawyers have huge dockets. Our bankruptcy lawyers have hundreds of cases that they handle. So I don't think there will be a big increase in the overall number of cases.
Representative Miller.
And in reference to, again, major cases, under the categories of major cases that I'm looking at, Ticketmaster, when did that become an issue for the state of Tennessee and Attorney General's office, Ticketmasters?
Sure. So it was a couple months ago. It was the Taylor Swift ticket thing. And, I got lit up for not doing anything sooner, but I was only the attorney general for about a month at the time. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, there were antitrust and consumer protection concerns about Ticketmaster. It's never changed. Tennessee has such a rich investment in the music industry. And, every piece of evidence we've seen, and a lot of it's publicly available, is that there's a problem there. And someone needs to do something about it. It's not the biggest case in the world, but someone's got to do something about it.
Representative Parkinson, we are well over time.
Thank you.
Could we ask you to maybe provide your question to the chair, and we will get it to the AG and get an answer for you? Thank you, the Generals Committee and your team for being here. And again, thank you for all of the breadth and depth of work that you all do for the citizens of Tennessee on a daily basis. That most of it happens in that building next door, but we don't know a lot about what's going on. Obviously, many things other than the headline cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee.
And we will ask our district attorney generals to come forward. I believe we have General Crump is here representing that group today, and I will ask him to introduce his team and get us underway.
Good morning, Madam Chair.
Good morning.
My name is Stephen Crump. I'm the district attorney from the 10th Judicial District, which is Southeast Tennessee, Bradley, McMinn, Monroe, and Polk counties. I'm the legislative chair for the Tennessee District Attorneys General Conference. I'm joined by District Attorney General Dave Clark, who is the chair of our Finance and Audit Committee, as well as our Assistant Fiscal Director, Brian Jeffries. And we're here today to talk to you about both our performance from the last year and our outlook for the next. If you look on your dashboard at the first slide from our presentation, we want to start by going back through last year. Obviously, last year was the first year where we began to really shake off in our court systems and our trial court systems the effects of COVID. As the numbers began to increase, we started to see those numbers come through, and our grand juries begin to really move forward. As always, we review every criminal case across the district. That includes general sessions, juvenile delinquency matters, as well as criminal trial matters. During this last year, our offices oversaw and prosecuted 925,000 criminal matters across the state. That is an enormous number. Obviously, it is actually lower than it is from a couple of years ago. However, those numbers remained incredibly high to the average person, and certainly we feel those strains within our office. One of the most important numbers that we saw last year relates to our child protective investigative teams. You all have, over the years, made robust teams that very much look after the welfare and try to protect children. Last year, we saw an almost 51% increase in the number of referrals to those. That echoed what had been before that time anecdotal from COVID about the number of both domestic abuse and child abuse cases that had grown substantially during the COVID pandemic. We are seeing those cases now, and many of those, while they're being litigated, we see, but now we can see the front edge of the wave, if you will, with this huge number of increases. And to give you some sense, I believe those numbers actually were 14,000, up from slightly over 8,000. And so that gives you an idea of those numbers. One of the things that we've tried to do in an effort to lower our need for investment from people is to leverage technology within our offices. We are continuing to roll out 2 pieces of proprietary software to the state of Tennessee, Civic Case and Civic Docs. Those are both a document management system and a case management system that are specifically built to Tennessee. There were national platforms that we could have chosen. However, looking at those platforms, they were much more expensive, and frankly, they were tailored to very large offices that sometimes didn't match up with some of our smaller jurisdictions in this state. This is a system that allows our offices to both maintain digital copies of all of our case files, but also manage our cases from a docketing perspective, and also keep up with all of the things that have to go on in litigation. We are currently out in 11 offices with Civic docs. We have 11 offices using that. We are also beginning to roll out in 2 districts Civic Case over the next 18 months to 2 years. All offices within the state should be up and running with that. And while it has been a long process for us, it is one that has created a situation where there are no longer, in my district, I was one of the first ones to get Civic docs. I no longer have to deal with arguments about who got what in a courtroom. I can simply print off a sheet that shows where it was accessed by defense counsel, or they can show that we didn't release it to them. So there are no more arguments about that, and that's greatly enhanced our productivity and efficiency. This year, obviously, last year was an election year, and we have welcomed 9 new district attorneys to our ranks. That is less than when I came in 2014. We had 12 that year. So if you look at the conference, it is a very different conference than it was 8 years and 2 days ago from 14. I think there are only 6 of us that are still in office that were there on September 1 of 2014. Look at our next slide. We wanted to talk to you. You've seen the number, about 925,000 cases, how that breaks down. We on average handle, each assistant DA handles 1,743 cases per year in each of our districts. Those numbers vary depending upon the district and the number of assistants that they have. But overall, our numbers are 1,743. If you look at some of the surrounding states and look at some of the surrounding communities that we've surveyed, you can see that's a significantly higher number per assistant DA than exists in other places. The fiscal year 23 allocations that you all provide to us and the governor provided to us resulted in a significant decrease in those. Those are now down 242 cases from where they were last year. And so we are thankful for that, and we are glad to say that those numbers should continue to decrease as we look at the next budget. This year, we had asked for 32 positions within our conference. We have roughly 920 employees across all of the districts. We had asked for a total of 32 additional. I am glad to say that Governor Lee in his budget provided for all 32 of those. As you'll see, 8 of those positions are provided by expansion within our existing budget. The other positions are provided as new costs from the governor's budget, again, for a total of 32. In looking at the items from our particular budget that were funded and not funded, I want to start with what was funded. First, the service and experience credits for our lawyers were funded. That is $1.825 million that was provided in the governor's budget, along with the increase in office space rental for our offices. All of our offices, or a vast majority of our offices, are rented from private entities. Our leases run 8 years. We believe that 8-year leases are best for the state as they control costs more effectively, but every 8 years, there's typically a significant number that we have to go through and negotiate, and then also provide higher rental rates. So the number you see there of $784,700 represents all of our offices across the state and across all the districts. And lastly, our information systems need. This is part of the Civic Case Civic Docs system. This is to provide civic docs to Hamilton County, to the 11th Judicial District, who was not part of the original rollout of our platform. 27 of the 31 districts were in the original rollout. The 4 major metropolitan areas were not. Hamilton County is asked to become a part of that, and that's what this number represents. There were 3 areas of our budget. Well, there were more than 3 areas, but there were 3 areas that we wanted to talk to you about this year that were not funded. The first one is a salary increase for the district attorneys. Unlike the Attorney General, there is no statutory salary increase for our offices. We have traditionally lagged far behind the trial judges in our state. And while they do remarkable work, and we are proud to be colleagues and, if you will, teammates within the judicial system with them, we believe that our responsibilities equate to theirs on a daily basis. While they are responsible for a slice of the docket, we are responsible for every case. We manage both assistant DAs that take on the cases that the people want them to, but as well as the cases that you believe are important. And every day they go out bearing the name of the state of Tennessee and bearing the honor of the people of Tennessee, and we supervise those, something that a trial judge does not do. in short, we don't claim to be better than the trial judges. We just believe that our responsibilities are equal to theirs in a different way, and we would ask that that be recognized in terms of the salary that elected district attorneys are paid. Beyond that, you will see later, and we're going to talk about that, we're coming to both the governor and to this body with a substantial salary increase for our assistant DAs and for our criminal investigators. That is important because you heard the Attorney General's office talk about their turnover. We have not run yet a number for attrition for this last year, but our number will be, I would say, at least in that range. Typically what happens is people will come in and be hired as an assistant DA, and they will leave after 4 or 5 years because they've gotten a significant amount of trial experience. We see another drop off after about 13 years, and that's when people begin to really experience growth professionally as a lawyer, and they're also able to train young lawyers, and they're typically snatched up by larger firms. We're competing against the same firms that the Attorney General is. A starting salary for an assistant DA is roughly $54,000. A corrections officer in Hamilton County with a high school diploma can make $50,000 starting. We have to do something about those numbers. And we'll be coming back to this body with more information about that, but we wanted to preview that. But that's also part of why we are asking for our salary to be increased, because there's been sort of an unwritten rule, as I understand it, that the executive within an agency needs to be no more than, the highest employee needs to be no more than 85% of the executives. And so in order to get you there and to get our assistants where they need to be, that's going to need to go up. We're asking for $70,000 in specialized training. Each year, you all pass laws or you pass improvements or reforms of laws, and we need to retrain people in specific areas. In the past, we have offered specialized training to our lawyers in elder abuse, in human trafficking, and in violent crime reduction, and in capital sentencing. Each of those are incredibly important because they're the kinds of things that require long, intensive studies by someone in order to become proficient in them. Certainly, any assistant DA can go in and could argue one of these cases, but to truly become a specialist, there needs to be additional training. We're asking for $70,000 to continue that. And lastly, in our budget, we asked for $2.3 million for an increase in our child support personnel salaries. Currently, there are over 250 child support employees across the state that are not making what they were promised by the state of Tennessee. This number represents what it would take to bring all those 250,000 people, all those 250 people up to the salary that they are supposed to be in currently under state and DHS guidelines. Those numbers are incredibly important. And we would ask that this body and also in the governor's supplemental budget that they look favorably upon these folks who go out every day and try to make sure that mothers and fathers who are taking care of children have the funds they need to do that. As I said, we have a pay bill, and I want to give you some idea of where we are in terms of our pay in the state comparatively with other places. And there will be a more fulsome rollout of a salary comparison later on in relation to our specific bills. But if you look at the first bar in this graph, Nashville, Tennessee, this is an ADA salary comparison that was done by the National District Attorneys Association through a third party who went through and analyzed over 18 million data points to come up with what should be an appropriate salary for an assistant DA on an entry-level basis. If you look at what we are paid compared with other cities, they analyzed 15 cities across the country. And this is where Nashville came out. Nashville was the city they chose. We are competing against the large firms in the state who can pay twice what we can pay on entry level. They can certainly pay twice what we can for our experienced and talented lawyers. And we are losing a vast number of those. And why that hurts is those mid-level lawyers are the ones that truly train the younger lawyers as to how to be good assistant DAs. The senior people, and we are blessed in our office to have a number of people who have 25 years more experience. If you look at the numbers, we have over 90 people across the state as assistant DAs who have been with the state 25 years or more. Those people are handling the most significant and most serious cases, as well as managing and providing oversight in our offices. So it's our mid-level lawyers that truly make the courts run. They're the ones that make our young lawyers better and who provide a better work life, if you will, for them by giving them guidance and assurance. And we're losing those people at an extraordinary rate. Lastly, if you look at the last slide here, what we're asking for in that bill, and while it's not part of our budget, we did again want to preview this with it. Essentially what we're asking for is for our young lawyers, our starting lawyers, to begin at $63,800. That's still $4,000 roughly below what the ABA or the NDAA believed that a Nashville lawyer should start. While it's more expensive to live in a jurisdiction like Nashville, Memphis, Knoxville, or Chattanooga, sometimes it's harder for us to recruit to a smaller town. Lawyers will come out of law school and they want to live in an urban center. They want to live in a city that provides a lot of things. It's hard for me to get somebody to come and move to Tellico Plains, Tennessee for $53,000. That's just simply, while it's not as expensive to live in Tellico Plains, and I'll be honest with you, if I didn't live in Cleveland, Tennessee, I don't want to short them, I'd live in Tellico Plains, Tennessee. It's very difficult to have a young lawyer with a young family to say, I want you to move to a rural Appalachian town and establish a brand new life with no friends and no family around you. So with that being said, again, we appreciate very, very much what you have done for us in the past. You have been very generous to us, and we certainly are not here to ever complain. We're grateful to the Tennessee legislature and to Governor Lee and the preceding governors for all that they've given us. And with that, I'll answer any questions you all may have.
Thank you, General Crump. I do have a list of questioners. We're going to move right to it as we're rapidly becoming even further behind schedule. So Chairman Williams.
Thank you, General, for coming today. As you stated, last year we were able to add some additional positions to your office to help with caseload. Glad to hear that some of those have come down. I just didn't really hear that much about current open positions and those kinds of things. Maybe you could share with us, as the more budget hearings we have, the more we tend to hear that we're having difficulty filling those positions. I wondered, of those positions that we added last year, how many of those are filled? I think there were maybe 3 secretaries, 5 investigators, and I think another 12 victims coordinators. If you could share with me about that, I would appreciate it.
Certainly, and thank you for the question. We currently have 71 open positions across the state out of roughly 900 positions. Of those, 37 are state positions, which would be state prosecution positions. That number fluctuates, and this number will not be the same probably by this afternoon, and it certainly will not be the same by tomorrow, because there will be someone who may have left or someone who may have been hired. We just came through a transition year. A number of new elected DAs, a number of assistant DAs chose to move or were invited to move. They made those choices. Many of those found homes in other offices across the state. But currently within our criminal division, we have 37 positions. Those are everything from a secretary, an assistant victim witness coordinator, to an assistant district attorney. We have 16 within the child support division. That number has gone up by, I think, 6 in the last month. Those numbers are greatly increasing. And then in local funded positions, we have 18. I can tell you, when I came into office in 2014, I sat down on July the 1st. I came in a little bit early. I had 83 resumes from lawyers on my desk for no open positions. I have an open position currently, which is a DUI position. I have 3. We'll be interviewing 2 of those on Friday. The number of people who are applying to our offices has dwindled greatly. And while we are fortunate we've kept a lot of people, this number will not stay where it is. Jody Pickens, who's the DA in Jackson, General Pickens, has 3 open ADA positions currently. And so I hope that answers your question, but those are the numbers as they currently stand. I can't tell you whether those are new positions or those were existing positions where they opened. I don't have that information, but I can certainly try to find it out.
No, thank you. That's what I was looking for. Just a follow-up question. As it relates to salary equity, those were in the budget last year. The question is were you able to use all the salary equity? Because I know that you talked about in your presentation that there were some additional funds where you're going to be able to add 8 positions, I think, based upon funds on hand. I just wondered how those salary equity numbers looked.
And I'll ask our assistant fiscal director to give you that specific answer.
Excuse me. Brian Jeffries, Deputy Fiscal Director. Yes, sir. We used a great amount of the equity. Just did an equity calculation this week. Got around $3.5 million left. Of course, our reversion target being 2.25. We're not that far above it. Classic training, about 5% equity. So we used a great deal of it already. And we're talking about funding 8 more positions from it as well. So we should be pretty tight.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and thank you for your presentation. The budget proposes around $2 million to establish 24 new positions, 6 secretaries, 6 ADAs, 12 victim witness coordinators, and then an additional 3 ADAs and 4 assistant victim witness coordinators with existing salary equity. How much salary equity remains to fund these 7 new positions?
Brian Jeffries again. So if we took out, it would be roughly around 3.3, but of course the idea is that we want to hit our reversion target. So we want to hit the 2.25. So if you look at that, we're saying roughly around $1 million.05 will be remaining equity to fund those.
Thank you.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized.
Chairman, I think my question may have just been asked by Representative Freeman on reversions. So.
All right. In that case, we go to Chairman Hicks.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and General, thank you for being here. Certainly good to see you and your staff. And you've touched a little bit on kind of what piqued my interest regarding the IT operational cost. If you go back and look at fiscal year 21-22 budget, I think appropriated was $784,700, and that was again for information system expenses. Fiscal year 23-24, $225,000, and that's going to be recurring. And of course, this is for the 11th Judicial District. And so can you just give a little more update on the technology system statewide? And again, you touched on that a little bit, but for instances, how many judicial districts currently participate in the system? What about future costs? Where are we going to be going? And so if you could just answer those questions.
Certainly, and thank you for that question. Currently, there are 11 offices that use the Civic Docs. There are 2 that have Civic Case. Over the next 18 months, we anticipate that 31 of the 32 district attorney's offices will be within this system. The $225,000 for this year is for Hamilton County specifically. We have already received funding for Knox County and also for Shelby County. The original rollout of this was much less expensive for the first 27 districts because we were their beta testers. And we were also, this product had no market value. It represented something that nobody had ever seen and nobody knew about. Now this is a product that can be sold by this company to other, or at least versions of it can be sold. So it has a market value. That increases the number. That's sort of where those numbers came from. The only office that has not yet opted or signaled an intention to join is Davidson County, the 20th Judicial District. All other districts have indicated they have interest, and we believe that the number overall will be $1.4 million for the total rollout.
And thank you for that. And just to finish up, and of course, we've mentioned the pay increases for the assistant DAs as well as those investigators. And I'll give a shameless plug to my DAs, Dan Armstrong and Jared Effler right now. And those, talking with those folks over, fall and through the winter months there before we came back, I understand the need. And so I am carrying that piece of legislation and happy to do so, and look forward to working with you guys and my colleagues here to try to get really these folks paid the way they should be paid. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
And General just a bit of a follow-up on Chairman Hicks' technology question. The cost of the technology, and we're really glad that Hamilton County is being included and appreciate that. But is that a static cost, or is that technology that has to be updated? To get to Chairman Hicks' earlier question about future cost, is this a one-time payment and you're done? Is this recurring every year? How does that work?
Thank you for that question. It is a subscription service, as most all software is now. It's very difficult to buy a standalone program. And frankly, because of the updates that are necessary, it's frankly it's a better idea to have subscription services. It is a cloud-based service, so we're paying not only for the storage in that, but we're also paying for the operational system itself. And so it is a subscription service. The number that I said, 1.4, we believe will be a recurring cost.
Thank you. Next on my list is Representative Love.
Thank you, Chair Lady, and thank you for your presentation. The issue of salaries, I see on your slide, the recommended base salary. You talked about how difficult it may be to get persons to come and to work. Do you have an amount of average salary across the state?
We have a median that certainly would be, we could give you, but in terms of the average, I don't have that, but we'll certainly provide that to you and to the committee. I don't have an average for all employees across the state.
Okay,
Representative Love.
just
continue.
one more. Thank you, Chair Lady. And help me with process on this. Are you able to, if you hire persons in Nashville, are they able to work in other districts, or how does that work? And the reason I ask is I see you focusing on the salary in Nashville. And I was just trying to figure out why the focus is on that piece.
But certainly they could. The NDAA specifically chose Nashville as a medium-sized city that they believed was a vibrant part of the Southeast, and so they picked a city that they thought would be appropriate. Certainly they can work in any district. There is no salary difference depending upon where you work. Some local communities choose to supplement the salaries of assistant DAs with stipends each year, but most do not. The vast majority simply rely upon the state salary.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Lady.
Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Back on the salary items that are not funded, those are not funded in the governor's budget, correct? And then you have DA salary increase to circuit court judge level. What is the circuit court judge level currently?
It's roughly $193,000.
Okay. And is that within the statutory step raises annually?
Ours is not. They get a COLA, as do we. We all receive the same thing, but each year they receive a specific addendum as well.
Okay. And again, 192,000 is what the circuit court judges are.
193 roughly.
And we want to increase the DA's salary to that level as well.
Yes, sir.
And are both of these DAs and circuit court 8-year terms?
Yes, they are.
Thank you, Madam Chair, lady.
Are there any other questions for General Crump and his team? Seeing none, we thank you for being with us today, and I'm sure we'll have more conversation about these additional asks as we move forward. So again, we appreciate your time with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, committee.
And while we're asking our Public Defenders Conference to come forward, I do have Chairman Hawk, I believe you have a personal order or announcement you'd like to attend to.
Thank you. Just a personal order. A member of the audience today is former Representative, current District Attorney Russ Johnson. Russ, if you could wave to everybody. There's a few folks up here who still worked with you, but Russ is doing a great job in Loudon. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We always welcome former members because at some point, all of us will be one. All right. Thank you so much. We have our public defenders with us, and Mr. Frog, I think that you are, Frog, I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering that name, and I should know by now because we have done this many times. But we recognize you and ask you to introduce yourself and your team and then proceed with your presentation.
Sure. Hi, my name is Patrick Frog. I'm the Executive Director of the Tennessee District Public Defenders Conference, and this is Chelsea Curtis. She's the Deputy Director. I think I have a pretty brief presentation, and I'll get into just really sort of how our budget is structured, and then that'll guide what we asked for, what ended up in the administration budget yesterday, and then we can talk about what those needs are based on. I think a lot of you have seen this before. I'll repeat it. we are a very lean agency. We're about 90% of our budget is salary and benefits. So when you talk about where we spend money, it's on people typically. If you look at the expenditures, we do pass through money for Shelby and Davidson County. Both of those counties had public defender's office before the conference was formed. They're still funded about 75% by their respective counties, but there is money. There's a statute that guides the budget increase for them. It's guided by CPI, and the money passes through our agency. We also have we have requested several items this year. A lot of them are guided by statute. So there's a statute that says, just like with the DAs, that guides our statutory pay increase. Our attorneys get step increases that match the DAs. That was our first request. We also request, and we do an estimate based on last year's for Shelby and Davidson County. This year, we also asked for a number of attorney positions, and I'll get into why in a few minutes. Secretaries, investigators, social workers, and we had a rent increase. I think the entire state seen rent problems. Our rent went up just like the DA's last year significantly, and a technology piece, which was Microsoft Office. The next slide shows, I've tried to break it down to where what we requested is in the left-hand column and what was in the administration budget is in the right-hand column. The statutory pay plan, Shelby and Davidson County were in the budget. Of the positions that we requested 22 attorneys, 14 legal secretaries, 11 investigators, and 11 social workers. The administration budget included money for 22 positions, and they designated 7 of those were for social workers, and the other 15 were not designated. So we'll figure out at some point in the next few weeks where the numbers lie, what those were intended to fund, how much money we have, and like that. We also did receive the $392,000 for a rent increase. Typically, when we ask for a position, we also build in below the line money for rent increases, and that was working and keeping us current up until 2022 when all of our leases came up for renewal, and then they just jumped. So that's what that represents. We had also had I think a lot of state agencies had an increase for Microsoft Office Online. I forget what you actually call that, but now it's a subscription service instead of like a disc. And we swallowed that for a year, and then we were funded this year. If you look at what we come in every year and we ask for staff increases, and I have a lot of questions sometimes about caseload and what it's based on. I think there's a general sense that we don't have enough staff, but nobody knows how much staff we should have. So it's hard to come up with a target. Up until around 2007, there's a statute that provides the comptroller will commission an independent caseload study. And up until around 2007, they did that. After 2007, they noted they weren't really funded for those caseload studies. And so they every year issue a letter saying we'd be happy to do it if we were provided the funding to do it. The math on those studies is not hard. I mean, the studies are comprehensive. The comptroller does a great job, but the actual math based on caseload is not that hard. And so I did it a couple of years ago. I went through and just did the actual math. My problem is, just so you know, I'm using outdated standards. The only standards available, there's one from like 72 and one from 99. None of those take into account the modern responsibilities of body cams, dash cams, electronic discovery. The electronic discovery, some of it can save a little time, but by and large, the responsibilities of both assistant district attorneys and assistant public defenders is greater now. There's more information and there's more to review. Based on those outdated studies 2 years ago, we were either 89 or 159 lawyers short, or 156, something like that, 150 something. And so that's what really guided us. I used that number and went to the district public defenders and said, okay, the numbers tell one story. What do you say? And they each came up with where they thought their offices were. And so that's what guided our request for positions. It's much less than any national study says we need. The modern studies that are out there, and several states have done them, Texas, Louisiana, Missouri, would say we need a lot more than that. But that's what guided it. Now, when I start looking at our actual caseload, because also about 4 years ago, I started hearing from the district public defenders, we're used to a lot of cases. We handle a lot of cases. It's what we do. But I started hearing that the caseload had increased, that something was changing. And this was, I guess, a year prior to the pandemic. And so when I looked at the open charges, you can see starting in 15 and going to 22, it didn't appear that way. It appeared, there were variations based on what was being prosecuted or crime rates, but it appeared to me, notwithstanding the 2 years of the pandemic, that it was pretty flat. And so I didn't really understand, but when you investigate and look past the numbers of cases, because remember, when you're looking at this number, a driver's license case equals a murder. And that's certainly not true of the work an attorney puts in. I ended up having to look at all of the districts except for the big four because of some data issues. We actually upgraded our case management system 4 or 5 years ago. Chattanooga took a few years to get off of their county and on to, but they're with us. Nashville took a few years to get off their county and they're finally with us. Memphis is the lone holdout to our case management system, but we can get some numbers from them. I mean, they're happy to give them. But if you look at those numbers, what you'll see is, for example, those are open charges. So this is not every case we handled that year. It's probably half the cases we handled, but it's outside of the big districts. It's the cases that came into the offices that year, not the ones that were already there. If you look at the decrease, it was in D's and E felonies. Now, this is not crime rate. This is what the public defenders handled, okay? But if you look at the B felonies over that amount of time, even during the pandemic, they were 3 times as high as they had been in 2014 of cases open. If you look at the closed cases, it tells a similar but not perfectly, not exactly the same story. The closed cases stayed more constant during the pandemic because we were still closing cases. We just weren't opening as many new ones during that time. But the higher end, the B felonies, the A felonies, that is the cases that take more work, went drastically up. And so once I figured that out, we were able to start talking about what the data was telling us in local jurisdiction, talking to judges saying, hey, can you recognize that our attorneys are overwhelmed? And it started to make a lot more sense why even attorneys who are used to handling way more than they ought to were telling me that they were overwhelmed. So that's what really guided our budget request. We track these numbers internally. These numbers are available to you. We track, what I'm tracking here are charges, because, a case versus a charge is kind of an interesting, you can count a case differently. If you have 3 charges, that might be one case. For example, if you're charged with burglary and assault and it's one incident, that might be one case, but it's 2 charges. When we implemented our case management system, we built in an algorithm that counts a case exactly like the Tennessee statute says to count a case. But so that number fluctuates based on how you group them. What doesn't fluctuate year to year is the number of charges. That's a good way to do an apples to apples comparison year to year. We did not prioritize this year. We had conversations with the DA's conference about a raise. We make the same as they do. If we didn't, then our employees would all want to go work for them. But we decided this year not to prioritize the elected raise in our budget request to the administration. We do think, however, there have been some changes over the winter where some of the executive branch lawyers are now making more. And so I think that will really affect us over time. I think some of the lawyers at DCS and the like have all been given raises, and I think that's a great thing. They should have been. But what that does is puts us at a competitive disadvantage. So we have huddled up with the DAs. We've signed on to their bill, and we will be seeking for the assistant public defenders. We will be seeking that pay raise as well. It was not in our original budget request because, if you talk to, I talked to Leader Lamberth about this yesterday. If you talk to 100 public defenders and say, what's your number one problem? If you don't take resources off the table, it'll be 100 people will say, we need more people out here. I'm drowning. I have too many cases. Lots of times I get a question about, what percentage of cases do you have versus the DAs? The answer is that's all over the map depending on the jurisdiction. Some judges, there are districts where we have 90%, there are districts where we have 50%. The job is different in that we don't have a police force. So typically if we have to investigate a case, we do that ourselves, but I don't know the percentage. When the Indigent Representation Task Force met, I tried to come up with that, and it was around 50% of the circuit cases. But if you go to any district and ask their judges or their DAs, I think you'll find that the public defenders handle all the serious cases. That's all I have for a presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Frog. And we do have some questions on our list, beginning with Representative.
We appreciate that. Last year in your 2022-23 budget, it included about $1.8 million in funding for some staffing, including 7 APDs, 3 legal secretaries, 7 investigators, and 3 social workers. The PDs were also authorized to utilize the existing salary equity to establish 3 additional APDs and 2 legal secretaries to support increased caseloads. And my questions, there's 3 of them that relate to that, and I'll ask all 3 of them that you can respond if that'll be okay. How many of these positions have been filled, and how much existing salary equity was used in 22-23 to hire the additional authorized staff, and then how much salary equity remains after these hires?
The answer to how many have been filled, I'm going to say all of them with an asterisk, because there could be one that I don't know of that remains unfilled. But we don't, if you look at I think you will get a green sheet, you might see that there are vacant positions. We don't run with vacant positions in my agency. We don't have them. We don't keep them strategically. We don't use them. What we do have there are positions that are funded by local money. There is a 1250 tax. It's actually a state tax, but it's collected locally. It's voted on locally. Those are revenue funded positions. When we run out of revenue, we don't fund those positions anymore. But when we get new positions, I mean, it's like water to a sponge. Those are filled as quickly as we can get them. I think we ran with 1 position that is state funded open longer than 12 months, and that's because it was a social worker and they just simply couldn't find anybody. But I think that's being filled right now. The question as to equity, how much did we use? I don't have an answer to that off the top of my head. I can get it. I can tell you the last time I looked at available salary equity, we were at about $600,000. When I say available, when we calculate equity, I hold back $250,000 for benefits, just sort of as a safety net. And we're pretty conservative with that equity. These new positions, the equity funding, and we had a new district come on board last year, the 32nd district, which is Hickman, Lewis, and Perry County. We had to fund some of that out of equity. So we had a real crunch. We got down to, I think in August, about $80,000 in available salary equity, which is pretty uncomfortable. But we were able to build our way back out. So I hope I answered your questions. I don't know how much those cost, but we used equity for all of them. I can find out if you need the exact.
That'd be great. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay, next on the list is Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Appreciate you guys coming today, and I think a couple of my questions have been answered, but it sounds like it would be really hard to actually define what the caseload is, because you've got rural, you've got urban, and then you also have murders versus a bounce check or something like that. And so, but is there a way to actually sort of put a number on what the caseload is right now per attorney? Do y'all have that? And what do you expect it to be after these positions come online?
So the way that we measure the caseload, and I'm going to try and answer your question, but it is hard to answer. I can show you how many cases we opened. I can do that by charge level. I can do that by charge name. I can tell you how many we closed. I can do that in any fiscal year. I can do that in a month. I could do it this week if I needed to. The problem with that is we also have very limited administrative help. The Indigent Representation Task Force that met in around 2017 noted the public defenders need help, but boy, do they need secretaries. So I've got I've got a 5-county district with 1 secretary, and we're asking her to answer the phone, do secretarial work, and input this data into our case management system. So some of our data I can't check. If you said, how many aggravated burglaries did you pick up yesterday? I might be out of date. It's hard for me to pinpoint right now what our caseload is, but I can tell you pretty close, and I can tell you by weight. I know that when I was an assistant public defender in Nashville in the early 2000s, my caseload, I would carry around 50 serious felony cases at a time. I've got districts, a lot of districts where they're doing 4 times that right now, where they're carrying 200 serious felony cases at a time. It's too much. But as to if you've got other, I can get with you after, or I can show you anybody sort of what our case numbers are and how they figure per attorney, per district.
Chairman Boyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. And then the positions, when they do come online, do you already have an idea of where they're going to go? Have y'all got them earmarked? Are they going rural? Are they going Shelby, Davidson? Do you know?
So they don't go to Shelby and Davidson because they operate independently fiscally. I mean, Shelby and Davidson public defenders are county employees. Unlike the DAs. The DAs, I think they're state employees, but those are actually county employees. I do have an idea when I make the request, they're actually designated based on who asked. I have a list, this district wanted 1 secretary and 2 lawyers, et cetera. The problem is when we get only some of that granted, then we have to figure that out. So we'll get together as a group and sort of have a cage match to figure out where the new assistants go, but we haven't done that yet.
Thank you.
I think there might be some pending legislation barring cage matches, so you may have to find another methodology there. Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again for your good, enlightening presentation. And you've done a great job of kind of laying out the case in terms of your staffings, but based on the responses you provided to the questionnaire at the Public Defenders Conference, you requested 61 positions for this coming FY, and this budget includes 22 of those positions. So, with that said, how will your agency be impacted by not receiving these additional 39 positions?
How will be? I mean, we'll do what we always do. We will make do. And what we'll do first is try and prioritize. Last year, we were in the same boat. We had a pretty big ask. We got about 30% of it in the administration budget, which was welcome, and we appreciate it. But what we did is then look at caseloads, geography, individual districts, quirks, and came up with, I recommended where they should go. The district public defenders ultimately decided where they go. That'll happen again. How it'll impact it is we will continue to operate without enough staff. How that impacts us, generally speaking, I think is bad. I mean, I think it's bad for the state. I think it makes us vulnerable to convictions being overturned. I think it makes us vulnerable to constitutional challenges of all kinds. When we don't take a case, when we conflict off a case for any reason, whether that's because we have a conflict of interest or because we have too many cases, somebody has to pay for that. And it's a separate fund called the Indigent Defense Fund. So when we get overwhelmed, we push the ball under the water over here and it pops up over in the AOC. So that's how we're impacted. I mean, it's not good, but we will make do.
Thank you. But I guess just to help me understand and perhaps others, at what point does the caseload become so overwhelming that you would have to say to a judge, we cannot effectively represent this person? And is there a methodology at that point for a court-appointed attorney? What happens when it's just simply this is the last straw and the camel's back breaks?
Right. I don't know. I'll tell you that and I should have said this at the outset for anybody who doesn't know, when the conference was invented, we were made to imitate the district attorneys. Just like them, we have 32 individual districts, 31 of whom are elected. Shelby County predated the conference and they're appointed by the county mayor. But other than that, they're elected officials. So how those offices handle their caseloads is sort of up to them individually. broadly speaking, there is a Supreme Court rule that says if we have too many cases, we can go to a judge and demonstrate to that judge that we're overwhelmed and they should appoint somebody else. But the AOC, the Indigent Defense Fund, is under the same financial pressures that we're under. And those judges every year are told at their judicial conferences, quit appointing other people, please appoint the public defender as often as possible. So that institutional pressure is sort of passing a hot potato around. What happens when it gets to be too much? The state has a responsibility. We have to provide representation. So I think all the bad things that can happen, you can imagine,
Thank you. I see no additional questions, so, I'm sorry. You're on the second column. Representative Sparks.
Thank you. Director, I see on line 7, you're asking for 11 more social worker positions. Recently, a couple of years ago, we held an opioid mental health town hall in my community. We had well attended, about 100 folks there. Some parents showed up, that their child had passed away due to drug addiction. My former police chief, she's since passed. I can remember her advocating for more counselors and social workers. Do you see these 11 as an investment? I mean, I'm assuming these folks help people get into drug treatment and help. So just elaborate on those 11 positions, why they're needed. Thank you, sir.
Sure. So we started a social worker program, I think around 2017, with a grant for 3. And then that grew into a grant for 7. And then we've added a few state positions here and there. And it's been fantastic. The reason our request for the number of social workers has gone up is because it's succeeded in some districts and spread to other districts. So, you could look at a public defender and think, why would you need a social worker? You're just there to be in court. But honestly, we end up in a position exactly like a lot of sheriffs are, which is we didn't want to be mental health counselors. We didn't go to law school to be mental health counselors, but we end up with those issues. And we found that, not all of our clients are guilty, but for the ones who are repeatedly guilty, particularly of small crimes, we can really impact them. If we can help them change behavior and not come back, it's a win-win. The state of Tennessee wins, less crime. Our office wins, less resources invested. So I think the social workers have been a real help. If you have one in your district, talk to your public defender, or I can send a public defender to talk to you about it. It's really a good thing. They are able to connect people to resources, connect them to mental health resources, and a lot of times stop those repeat offenders at a very low level from coming back.
Leader Lambert.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I wanted to wait till after both had presented, but for both the District Attorney's Conference and the Public Defender's Conference, thanks for the job that y'all do. It is, especially with the Public Defender's Conference, when you ask about appointment of private counsel, it is the most efficient and effective way that indigent representation occurs through the Public Defender's Conference, and obviously the District Attorney's Conference has to handle every single case. So if we want a miscarriage in justice to occur, then we can underfund these two entities. If we want to make sure that individualized assessments are being made on every single case, they just need more resources. We hear it every year, and it's not that they're just coming down here every year and asking for it. You can see it. If you've not been to your local general sessions court at some point, I would merely ask the members of this committee, just go visit one day. You don't even have to tell them you're there and you're a state rep. Just wander in the back and watch court for a day. It's something else. I mean, both of these entities really work their people bare. And I just want to say thank you to both of y'all. It's both very important. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
And I'll just say an amen to the court issue. I spent a couple of hours in General Sessions Court in Hamilton County during our break, and the judge presiding welcomed me to the ER of the judicial system, and that's exactly what it was like. So thank you, Director Frog, and for coming and for, again, just making it clear that these positions, as Leader Lambert said, these requests are not facetious. They're not just, we need more money. There's real data and a driving need behind them. So we appreciate you sharing that with us today.
Thank you.
We will ask our Administrative Office of the Courts to be coming forward. They're next on our list. Yeah, I'm just okay. While we were waiting for our AOC, Representative Shaw, I believe you have a personal order you'd like to attend to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do. Thank you. I am honored today to have as my page and my shadow today, Miss Paige Temple. She's from Jackson, Tennessee, an honor student at the Madison Academic School in Jackson, and she's accompanied today by her father, Dr. Andre Temple, who is an economic developer and a specialist with the University of Tennessee. And they are here today, and if you and the committee could help me make them welcome and they would stand, I would appreciate it very much. Paige will be my shadow all day. She's here to figure out how all this works out, and I hope we can help her.
Well, perhaps she can help us. Thank you for being here. And thank you to our Administrative Office of the Courts. And we look forward to your presentation. Ms. Long, our new Administrative Director, I guess it's our first opportunity to welcome you to these hearings in your new role. So congratulations on that. And please pass along our best wishes for a happy retirement to our friend Deborah Tate.
Now it's on. Yay. Thank you, Chair Lady Hazelwood, Vice Chairman Baum, and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing the AOC time to present its FY24 court system budget. I have a few slides that I will walk through, and I'm sure you're able to view them in the room. First, let me introduce who's joining me today to help answer any questions you may have. To my immediate right is Dalton Hensley, who is our fiscal director at the AOC, and then next to him is Michelle Consiglio Young. Many of you know her. She is our director and counsel for intergovernmental affairs. So for new members, I wanted to start by sharing some exciting news for the judicial branch. We have, after the confirmation by this body, by the General Assembly, we will welcome one new judge and one new justice to the judiciary. Matthew Wilson, who is an assistant U.S. attorney in the Western District, will join the Criminal Court of Appeals, or Court of Criminal Appeals, filling in the vacancy left by the passing of Judge John Everett Williams. And then Dwight Tarwater, who many of you know, who was the former general counsel to Governor Bill Haslam, will join the Supreme Court when Justice Sharon Lee, who has announced her retirement after serving on the court since 2008, she will be retiring in August. So we look forward to working with the General Assembly to prepare for the confirmation hearings and welcoming those new members. So I wanted to start by, for the new members, just sharing a little bit about the AOC. We call it the AOC. It is the Tennessee Administrative Office of the Courts that serves the administrative arm, or as the administrative arm for the Tennessee Supreme Court. Our main purpose is assisting in the administration of justice and supporting the entire court system. The director serves as the chief administrative officer under the direction of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and at the pleasure of the Tennessee Supreme Court. I will not go through every duty that is listed there, and that is a non-exclusive list, let me just say, but I do want to use the last two bullets to kind of segue into a major initiative by the court. So the last two bullets reference the need to plan for future needs of the court system and provide court system-wide statistical data. We are excited and most appreciative of Governor Lee and his administration through the collective leadership with the judicial branch about a significant proposal in the miscellaneous appropriation of their proposed budget in the amount of $75 million to bring enterprise-wide, we're calling it enterprise-wide e-filing because it's more than just e-filing. E-filing is passing a document from a lawyer or a litigant to the court for filing. We're thinking of this in a broader sense. So yes, it is partly e-filing, but it also will allow the courts to move toward statewide statistical data for the court system, consistent and unified data for the court system. It's something we piece together now. This will make that much, much easier and much more reliable. We live in a digital world, and as the courts have become more comfortable with technology through the pandemic, many of them were doing video or Zoom hearings and video arraignments. And we have also welcomed a host of, and I hate to use the word younger because it kind of dates me too, but younger judges who are used to using technology in their practices. And then they join the court and we give them a pen. They're as comfortable with technology as I am with this pen. And so the vision for the courts to utilize technology in a larger sense includes the ability to modernize our systems. We've got some antiquated systems upon which we're trying to do e-filing. We need to take a look at that and see if those systems will accommodate the vision that we have for the future. We also want to unify the data, make it uniform from county to county so that we are calling the same things the same things. We want reliable data. We want the ability to access the data. Right now, it's very siloed in a court, in a county. We need to be able to share that data across counties and between courts. And then also, in an enterprise system, we would have statewide data to share with you all and other policy decision makers. We're looking for transparency. So the public should be able to access information, to look up a case, look up litigants to see what the status of a case is. We're envisioning a lookup system in our data warehouse that would be part of this enterprise-wide e-filing. We also, it allows for innovation. If you have this information housed in one place, then you have the ability to employ tools that will data mine that information to help us pick out patterns in the data, to identify trends, and that also will help lead decision-making, wise decision-making for the state. We have courts that have suffered fires and floods and tornadoes. By having the data in an electronic database, that provides for the resiliency of the courts to return to normal business practices. That's just scratching the surface, and I don't want to take up too much time on it, but it is such a significant opportunity for the court system that I had to take a little time to spend on that today. But I know that you have asked me to be here. Let me make one note. We've been working on this project not alone. We have been supported by STS in finance and administration. They are used to managing large projects of this nature. We believe that this is the right time to do the right thing for the right reasons. And so we are so pleased to have the support of STS in that effort. And so we certainly thank the governor for including it and ask for your support as well. So now let me move to our budget request. That's why you asked me to be here. So the governor's proposed budget for the court system is a total recommended budget of $191,632,600. In addition to our base budget, we have the following budget requests. So it starts with the COLA, which is statutory. You're aware of that. It is estimated at 5% this year. Next on the list is our 5 new state trial judges request. This is not a new request. We had this request last year and it was unsuccessful. But let me just restate that the tool that we use to determine judicial resources in this state is the weighted caseload study. The weighted caseload study for the 3 consecutive years between 2019, 2018, and 2017, that's 19 is the last time we had one due to the pandemic, showed that there was a need for at least one judge in the 13th, the 19th, the 22nd, and the 23rd. And in fact, the 19th has shown for 2 years a need for 2 judges. That has not changed. We continue to, it is a significant initiative for the Supreme Court to make sure that in those districts, and I know that there's Representative Kiesling has House Bill 43, because I know in your district, you have had some requests to carry that. We welcome that. It's a belt and suspenders approach. So we certainly would want the 23rd to have what it needs. And then several of you, Representative Barrett, yes, has a need in that regard, as well as Ryan Williams, Representative Williams, and we've talked about that. So we appreciate your support for that. I think the Chief Justice has said to me on a number of occasions that the Truth in Sentencing bill, like the strain that is happening in these districts, is only made acute by decision making. And one of those things that he references is the Truth in Sentencing Act. If defendants know, and this is not a debate about the bill at all, but just an understanding of the impact on the courts. Defendants know that their sentence is their sentence for certain offenses. The chances are that they are likely to take their chance with a jury trial. And so that's only going to extend the strain on the judicial resources in those areas. Not suggesting anything about the law, but simply to consider the judicial resources at this time. Let's see. As a belt and suspenders approach for us, we have included a request for additional funds for our senior judge program. There's an act called the Senior Judge Enabling Act in the statute that allows the Supreme Court to appoint senior retired judges to serve in districts, to serve on protracted cases. We can use that tool if we can fund one additional position. Actually, just the funding, we have the position. We just don't have enough money to fund it. So it's a request for $285,000 just to fully fund one more position. Court security grants. I'm kind of lost in my slides here, but courtroom security grants. So that is to protect the courthouses and courtrooms. So we provide an annual report to the legislature, which was recently submitted, I think in January, that showed that most of our courts have reached compliance with the standards from the 90s. Most of those standards focused on the protection of the judge in the courtroom. What the report also showed is that there are about 52 counties that are still not in compliance with the 2018 standards. The 2018 standards focus primarily on the public spaces in the courthouse, your clerk area. And so we have about 52 counties that still need the additional support to protect those areas. That request is, we believe we can expedite that with the $4 million request. We have, I keep doing that. We have the same problem that you've heard all morning long and probably will hear from others in state government, and that is the ability to hire, retain quality employees. We followed the lead of DOHR that did a salary study for their attorneys. I think you've heard this morning that everybody is struggling to recruit and retain attorneys. If we don't keep up with our sister agencies in state government, then they're simply we're going to lose people inside the enterprise of state government. Not to mention that we always compete, and we always compete with the private sector. So we've done that salary study for our lawyer positions, as well as a mid-market adjustment. We learned that the executive branch had done a mid-market adjustment on other positions, so we did the same. And that request is in the governor's proposed budget. We believe what they did, why it's more than what we requested, was just a 5% across the board, and then we'll have to look at those studies and decide how to apply it, assuming it stays in the budget. Then there's a request for the AOC. The AOC needs additional specialized IT staff. We have some really great people. I say we're a small but mighty team. We support several systems for the entire court system, and we do that with a very small team. We're seeking 3 positions. One is a solutions architect, which is that person that kind of helps drive the business processes or connect business processes with solutions. And if we, are successful with the enterprise e-filing, that position is acutely needed. A business intelligence analyst, which will help us take the information that we have today. I don't know if you've been on our website, but we have a report, a statistical report that is 443 pages long of line by line data. We would love to be able to turn that into something a bit more useful and something that easily tells a story about the court system. And then we have improved the bandwidth in some of our supported courthouses by using what is called SD-WAN. And I will get quickly out of my lane of expertise. I'm a lawyer, not an IT specialist, but my understanding is now that we manage those networks, we also have to manage the security of those networks. And so we need to hire a person to do that. And then I'm going to stop because I think I'm running short of time. I do have 2 other slides for those things that were not included in the governor's budget, proposed budget. And if any member would like to have a conversation with us about those things, I welcome that. But thank you so much for your time. We'll take any questions.
Thank you. And I neglected to say in the beginning of these hearings, but the information is on your dashboard. So the slides that were just mentioned, you do have them available to you in dashboard. We thank you for your presentation, and I do have some questions beginning with Chairman Hawk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Director Long, thank you. I enjoy our conversations. We get to live vicariously through our kids and talk about the successes of them. So thank you for and joining us on that one-on-one basis. I appreciate that. I've got a couple of questions. And first, I want to go to one of the issues that you didn't speak of, the 5 new state trial judges that were not included in the budget. And you mentioned the representatives and the senators who are serving in those areas. But I want to go beyond that. I want to go into our existing trial level judiciary, the existing courts. Are we adequately funding what we've got there at that trial level?
Adequately funding the resources available in
Broad sense, yes, ma'am.
So the judges' salaries are set. We provide equipment, and typically the county provides the courthouse space. If there's space in that building for judges to have chambers, otherwise we would provide an office through a lease. And so I think that we are okay in terms of how we outfit and resource our judges. At least I'm not hearing complaints. And if you are, I need to know that. That's on that list of duties.
Thank you, Director Long. And the message I've got from one individual in particular says, "We're pleased. We just want it on the record." So that was a good answer that you gave. In that same vein, let's talk about the case backlogs that have been caused by the pandemic. How have we addressed the backlog, and are we back where we need to be in terms of addressing the backlog and going forward? Thank you.
Thankfully, the courts were able to maintain operations. What really took a hit was jury trials. And so when last I looked at the data, we're starting to climb back up in terms of, I'm not aware of a backlog as I sit here today. The judges have worked very hard to get those dockets moving again. And other matters were able to be handled during the pandemic through some use of technology. So I'm not aware of a backlog in any particular place right now.
Thank you, Chairman Hogg. And we have other questioners on the list, but while it's on my mind, and I apologize, I did have to step out. So if you covered this, then please, my regrets for having to repeat yourself. But We heard from the Public Defenders Conference just before you all. At some point, we heard earlier from our post-conviction defender, and there's a common issue, the indigent fund. Both of those entities have valid needs to draw from that fund. And, the public defender is saying the judges are being told, don't do court-appointed attorneys because we don't have money to fund them. And the post-conviction defender issue is hiring expert witnesses and those things that cost money. And like everything else that we are hearing about, those costs have gone up tremendously. So can you talk a little bit about that fund and how it's determined who gets to access it and how it's replenished, and what, if anything, you feel we need to do about that?
So absolutely. We administer or manage the fund at the AOC. The fund is governed by Rule 13 of the Tennessee Supreme Court. It pays for appointed attorneys, which are private attorneys when the PD's office cannot provide the representation, and experts and investigators in certain cases or matters. The rule governs how those appointments are made, what qualifies for coverage. It has a hourly rate for the appointed attorneys with a cap per category for the type of representation. You asked, I'm sorry, the other two questions.
The fund itself, how is it funded? And do you see the same strain on that fund as we're hearing from other entities?
I think the fund definitely has a strain. It is funded by this body. And in 2019, there was a task force report done on the fund that gave us some recommendations about what would assist the fund. We have taken some time, and I think at that time there was a request for $20 million to support the fund and to support some increase in attorney rates. What we see today is what we were able to do, because we didn't get a full funding at that time, was to increase the in and out of court rates by $10. And so it's $50 an hour for attorney representation. We have worked over time to come back and ask for additional funds. For what we're seeing now is about 90% of claims, because it takes some time for the claims to process through. So we had claims at the old rates. We're now seeing about 90% of all claims are at the new rate. And it usually, I had a slide here that would show, based on budget and expenditure, it's very, very close. Now, the COVID years have resulted in fewer claims. And so, thank you. But that money reverts to the general fund by statute. So we're still just paying claims at the rate that they come in up to the appropriated amount. So.
Thank you. And I think that's something for this committee to, consider as we move forward with the budget. We can increase the number of public defenders and pay for that, or we can increase the indigent fund and pay for court-appointed attorneys. Again, post-conviction defenders, and the cost, there is a cost to not doing these things. As was mentioned earlier, you run the risk of overturned convictions, retrials, all of those things. So it is a case of pay me now or pay me later. And if you pay me later, it might cost more. So I just think that is something in our deliberations that we as a committee might want to consider. And before I move to my next questioner, I do want to recognize the late but great Leader Cochran, who has joined us. We're so glad to have you here with us this morning. Leader Cochran.
I always love to make an entrance, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much for welcoming me.
Chairman Baum, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Long, for your presentation and telling us a little bit already about the e-filing system. We've got quite a bit of money proposed for that system, and so I just wanted to ask a few more questions about it. You conducted the study in December of last year. Could you give us a quick summary of what the results of that study were?
So thanks to this body and the governor's office, we had available to us through STS about $1.5 million to conduct a study. We went through the competitive bid process and selected the National Center for State Courts. With their expertise in what other courts are doing, and they're in the process of working with the federal court to revamp, I don't know what the right word is, but to upgrade PACER. We thought it was the least but best responder in that proposal. So we've been engaged with them doing in-person across the state visits with courts and judges and clerks and some members of this body and others, just to understand where we are and what every stakeholder, every court user needs. That draft report was due February 1. We did get the draft. We're working on fine tuning the draft with the National Center, and it will be available for anybody that would like to see it. But so what did we learn? We learned that there are tools that are, I say what we're doing is we're kind of baking bread. We're making our own bread, and bread is available off the shelf. So we learned that there are many tools that 26 other states and the District of Columbia are using for e-filing that are tailored to court processes. We want to access that. We also learned that we need to look a little further at our infrastructure to make sure our infrastructure is ready for that. We learned some challenges as we talked with clerks about how they're trying to interface our existing system. We have, by statute, the Tennessee Case Information System that was implemented in 2003. It is 2003 technology. And one of their recommendations is that we need to do a separate study to look at that. And then also bandwidth in counties impacts the ability of these systems to operate well. And so we'll be looking at infrastructure as well. So we've got a couple of steps to go through to really know all that we need to build in this infrastructure. We also learned that we have, I could go on and on about this, so you may be sorry you asked me this, but we also learned that in our larger counties, like the problem is acute in the smaller rural counties. We have one county that is still completely paper in 2023. But in our larger counties, they have adopted, because it's been a local decision dependent upon local budgeting and local competing priorities to invest in those courts. And so in our larger counties, I think Shelby County was the first to actually e-file in 2012. Knox County built their own system. They're in the process of deciding, it's old technology too, and they're looking to the state to help them move in this direction. Davidson County is using a vendor, one of the vendors that we know well, and the idea would be that if we can build a system with components that are built on current technology, then that technology is open source. And so you can integrate with open source technology. We can integrate with those that are using open source technology. Unfortunately, the system that we maintain, it's a little harder.
I can tell you're excited about the possibilities. So with all that information, when do you think the system will be implemented? Like how long and how will it be implemented?
We have looked at, it will be a rolling implementation based on court readiness. So we're not going to force clerks or judges to move to anything they're not ready to move to. We have several early adopters already identified that would be ready to move in this direction. We'll pilot first. I mean, of course, I said our first step is a little more study. We think in the second year, we will be implementing in those early adopters, in those courts that are early adopters to this process. And then by the third year, have, depending on the direction relative to the building blocks, we could have 85% implemented.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chairman Baum. And Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a comment and a couple of questions. Thank you, Director Long, for being here. I have practiced law in the 23rd Judicial District, and thank you for mentioning my request for 20 years, over 20 years now. And I think if you go to the next slide that you have, where you have your breakdown of 5 new state trial court judges, the 23rd Judicial District is covering 5 counties with 3 judges. We have been on the list every time this report has come out. I have no doubt that we're going to be on the list again when the new report is done. Since the last report was performed, 2 of our counties have rolled their probate court into their circuit court. So now that's added to the docket that these 3 judges are having to cover in these 5 counties. Only one of these counties has erected a new justice center. We're very proud of it in Dixon County, but the other remaining counties in this district are operating in very old, very small, very cramped courthouses. Our judges are literally operating out of their cars. Their staffs don't have office spaces in these courthouses. It's difficult. So as you can see, our friends to the north and northeast in Montgomery and Robertson County are operating 2 counties with 6 judges already. We're operating 5 counties with 3 judges that are handling everything from a divorce or a custody hearing going straight into a murder trial the very next day. Our courts are going into the night of 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night and having courts on weekends in order to keep up with the docket. I urge my friends here in my TED Talk to please listen to the folks that are telling you that these judicial districts are overrun and these judges need help. With that being said, in the 21-22 budget, there was $8.6 million appropriated for the court information system upgrade. Can you give us a report as to how that's going?
I would love to. So we requested 8.6 million. This is that Tensis system that I mentioned earlier. The system was going to basically crash because it is built on 4 Internet Explorer. I'm not trying to pile on Tensis here, but it was built on for Internet Explorer, and Internet Explorer's gone away. And so we had to invest in what some are calling a refresh of the system. I call it an overhaul of the system so that it would be platform agnostic and be able to continue to function in the places where it functions. So that's kind of what we do with that system, is we just patch to keep it going. And so I'm really excited about the opportunity to actually have a study with some consultants come in and tell us, what do we have? How can we improve it? Or do we need to replace it?
Representative Barrett, and we are a little past our time, so I'm going to ask that we have several questioners on the list. So we're going to try and get through them, but I'm going to ask that questioners be brief and the answers be as brief as possible as well. So Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No more TED Talks, I promise. In the last fiscal year, we also put in $150,000 recurring for this pretrial texting initiative. Can you give us an update on that? Is that system fully operational now? How many citizens are actually using it? Do you have any of that data to provide to the committee?
So we may have to get back to you on that. What I can tell you is that it's gone live in the courts and counties, but you would like to know numbers that
Yes,
are
ma'am.
actually being benefited by that. We do have that, but not today. I will get it to your office.
Thank you very much.
Representative Lynn, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, in the FY 2024 budget includes $4 million for courtroom security grants. There are two sets of minimum court security standards. The first was enacted in the 1990s, and additional requirements were added in 2018. Can you provide an overview of the difference between the two standards and how many counties are currently non-compliant, being as brief as possible?
Okay, being as brief as possible. We did have appropriation in 2 consecutive years of $2 million each year for bringing the number of counties that we have brought into compliance. So 92 counties are in compliance with those 90s standards, and
Nice.
52, I can't do the math right here, 52 are not in compliance with the 2018 standards.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being brief. How will this grant pool be distributed, and will it be done on a competitive basis or on a needs basis for those counties which are non-compliant?
So the counties are responsible for telling us what they need. And so we have an application or a process where they tell us what they need. They then expend the money, which has been a bit of a problem with local budgets. They expend the money, we reimburse them. We reimburse them for what they've expended. That's how we keep track of who's got what.
Representative Sparks.
Real quick, thank you, Chairman. You mentioned silos earlier. Surely that doesn't happen in state government, does it? I'm kidding you. I appreciate your passion. The 75 million, I've heard Leader Lambert and Representative Shaw talk about the importance of that. Can you make a good argument? One, it's an investment in infrastructure, like you mentioned. Is it an investment in changing lives and also workforce development?
So it is definitely an investment in changing lives. And then to the extent that we would have the ability to integrate with any other open source among our justice partners, local law enforcement, corrections, TBI, safety, then we will be able to have a lot or more consistent, connected information to start to track the big problems in the state, to help solve those problems. So ultimately, yes, it impacts our workforce. It impacts the prosperity of the lives of Tennesseans. It impacts all the decision-making that can be had when we have the ability to track the continuum of situations that impact families. I neglected to mention juveniles. So we, the legislative branch and the governor's office supported a juvenile data system a couple of years ago that has begun unrolling. It's open source data. We can connect to that and be able to track dependency and neglect and those matters that impact children in the state. And so I think it serves all of that. It just brings reliable data to your hands for the best decision making for our state.
Thank you. That completes my list. Ms. Long, we appreciate you being here today. You successfully, very successfully navigated your first budget hearing in front of this House committee. So we do appreciate your time.
Well, I was here last year, but I was 13 days into the job.
Well, I guess I was still, in my mind, visualizing Director Tate there, so I apologize. And I am going to ask that our next presenters, the Corrections Institute, if you guys would come forward. And I want to commend you because I believe you have been here for a significant part of this morning watching these scintillating hearings. And so we're very proud of your fortitude. So, and Mr. Wall, Director Wall, if you would just introduce yourself and whoever you are going to have choosing to be a part of your presentation. And then we are running a little bit behind. Chairman Hicks will be in here with the gavel, knocking me in the head and moving me out of the way quickly. So we will ask you to be as brief but thorough as possible, and we'll ask our questioners to do the same. So Director Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here with Deputy Director Bob Bass and our ASA 5, Joanne Pogue, who handles our finances, as well as our project manager, Jason Smith, who's in the audience. I will make this quick. We're the jail people and the correctional and anything corrections on the local level, from training to inspections to certification to accreditation to technical assistance. And we help all 95 counties, all 95 sheriffs, all 126 correctional facilities across this wonderful state. And we are not requesting any additional money into our budget. The governor and his office was absolutely wonderful to us last year to help us start some initiatives with accreditation and specialized training. They have added 25,000 to our budget this upcoming year for a continued effort in evidence-based programming, train the trainers for local facilities that may not be able to afford, or to provide access to train the trainers for specifically MRT, motor recognition therapy, train the trainers so local facilities in rural areas can have access to evidence-based programming, therefore qualifying them for accreditation. I'll leave that there, and I'll go straight to questions, and I'll answer anything you all have. Thank you all for having me here today.
Thank you for being here, and you can't beat that for brevity, so thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We do have some questioners on the list, and Leader Cochran, once you're here, you're actively engaged. We commend you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll try to jump right in. So thank you all for being with us this morning. So this current fiscal year, we appropriated $4.9 million to expand partnership with the Tennessee Board of Regents and establish regional training sites. Can you give us an overview? How is that going? Are we up and running?
We're up and running on the Corrections Institute end. TCAT TBR took some time to hire instructors, get their program set up. The curriculum was in place. We are steady rolling into 2023 with hopefully all 19 TCAT TBRs being online prior to the end of the calendar year. But we have established all the different sites, worked with TCAT and TBR to get every single one of these established, which they are all now established. We're waiting for enrollment to start. About half of the enrollment has started this past January.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just a couple follow-ups there. And so established, but they're not operational just yet, right? Is that?
Some are. The Wilson County began registration. Carter County's been operational. That was our pilot program. And we have 2 or 3 other sites that have begun the registration piece for the correctional officer training. My last indication from them was by, FY, 23-24, so July 1 of this year, they will be ready to go. And then the piece with the regional training locations, we have completed all the bids for leases. We're still waiting on a couple to come back. We have landed in sites that are Clinton, Tennessee, Lebanon, Tennessee, and Jackson, Tennessee will be the sites of the regional training locations. We have completed all that process. Now we're just waiting to go in front of the commission for to approve the leases. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
Chairman Baum.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Wall, for your presentation and comments. I've got a few questions about the Reentry Success Act that we passed, I guess, about 2 years ago. It included some accreditation procedures, and I was wondering if you could give us maybe a summary of how many tiers of accreditation there are and how many of our jails have been accredited under that act.
Absolutely. So starting this year, we began the accreditation process in March 2022. The rules were approved. And then we began the process of educating, getting people prepared. This past December, we have 9 accredited facilities. 2 of them are Tier 2, and the remainder of the 9 are Tier 1 facilities. We are currently working with 30 different counties across the state working on accreditation now. So we anticipate between 20 and 30 in this calendar year to be accredited either in Tier 1 or Tier 2. And so everything is moving forward. There was a lot of people who said, hey, we're going to wait and see how our neighbor does, and then we'll move forward. But as far as the TCI end is concerned, we're working every day with the counties who want to achieve accreditation. Everything is going fantastic on our end. Now they'll have the piece with getting the reimbursement from the Department of Correction.
Okay, that's good to hear. I suspect some jails have had some problems getting the accreditation. For those that have, what are typical problems that they've had?
Staffing. Staffing is a huge problem across the state. They want to implement certain things, and And while it is better than we saw last year, we've seen a lot of county legislative bodies step up to the plate and look for ways to recruit and retain. We're doing some of those things with lots of our initiatives to try to help them recruit and retain individuals through different training initiatives and through a peer support officer initiative that we're currently operating in. And so that's the biggest challenge, is staffing and getting those individuals in the door and retaining them.
Just to follow up to that, do we have any stats that show if they do participate in the training, how that might impact their retention?
Right now, the peer support network, we're just beginning that. We just completed the grant work. We're doing the train the trainer right now, and we're working on our second classes going on as we speak in Nashville. And next week it's in East Tennessee. We're hoping to have some strong numbers to say, hey, we're keeping individuals with some of these initiatives, with our mental health approach, with the CIT training and verbal de-escalation, and our certification and critical incident debriefing, all the specialized training we're starting to roll in. We're seeing a lot more investments in the facilities, and that seems to be helping. Do I have a specific number tied to that individual course? Not as of yet.
Thank you. You just would think common sense would lead you to believe that if people were better trained, they would be more comfortable in the position and better able to handle it, and more willing to continue to do the work. But we'll
Yes,
look
ma'am.
forward to seeing if the numbers bear out our anecdotal expectations. Chairman Faison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gentlemen, ladies, thanks for being here. The Corrections Institute has one reserve fund, which is utilized to fund the certification training for local correctional personnel. Funding for this reserve is provided through the 10-cent fee applied to each one of the completed phone calls made by the inmates housed in the local jail or workshop. So my question is, how much does the Institute utilize annually from this fund, and how are those funds used specifically, and how many personnel are trained annually?
Okay, so we utilize about $1 million out of that each year, which it generates approximately $1.2 million. We have 7 positions that are paid through that for different trainers across the state. The fund has built up when the fund first started, so our spending authority to say, hey, how much money is coming in. So we're not spending as much as it's coming in, but it's closer to that now. However, one of the things that we have done with the fund balance is we created a grant, and we issued our first grant as an institute this year to all 95 counties who are interested in all local correctional facilities, $10,000 per agency to increase their training equipment and their availability to provide training. So the fund balance that you see there actually went down about 600, or is going down about $665,000 through grants that we've issued to local government. It's their money coming in. We're just sending it right back to them. And 67 counties have participated so far. Apologize.
Well, thank you, Director. We appreciate your patience and your brevity in your presentation. You're going to be one of our favorite presenters.
Hope so.
Thank you for being here today. We are now back in session, and that does complete the budget hearings that we have scheduled for this morning. But I do want to remind everyone that bright and early Monday morning, and yes, I know the Super Bowl is Sunday night, but bright and early Monday morning, we have budget hearings beginning at 8 o'clock. Leader Cochran, all right, you heard me. Is there any other business? I'm sorry, 9 a.m. You're right. I'm just telling Leader Cochran 8, so he'll be certain to be here on time. But for the rest of you, it's 9 o'clock. And with that, we are adjourned.